You're listening to The Leagues, a World Soccer podcast with your host, Del Sheffer.
I think it just like this. Bust it.
All right. Thanks, everybody listening. This is episode 5 of the League's World Soccer Podcast. I have here with me Andrew Wiese, and we're going to talk about his experience at the World Cup in Russia and his background and just how he fell in love with soccer and what he's doing now, and also about his love for Atlanta United. So, Andrew, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Andrew and I touch base on Twitter and our shared love for soccer. We've been keeping in touch on there, and he agreed to come on the show today. And first, Andrew, tell us a little bit about your soccer background and how you first fell in love with the game.
Yeah, I grew up in small towns, both in Florida and in Georgia, but thankfully both are close to big metro areas. So in Florida, early on, I lived near Tampa. And then my family moved up to a small town called Toccoa, but it's fairly near Atlanta. And so even though I've been in small town USA growing up, I was pretty close to being in some good youth soccer hotspots. And so I don't know, my father played soccer in college a little bit, but that was so long ago, you know, it's a different game. But he would kick around with me in the yard, and it really developed a passion for me. And I watched it and I played youth soccer, but it wasn't until about probably, I guess, the 98 World Cup, actually, when I really fell in love with the sport. With my dad's job, I had access to this giant screen in this really empty place that had ESPN hooked up to it. And so for this 98 World Cup, basically for like a month, man, I remember just sitting down there in this like empty room in this basement where he worked, and just got to watch, you know, World Cup soccer every day in 98. And then, you know, so that really awakened my passion. And then the next year, the 99 World Cup and the Women's World Cup here in the U.S., that really cemented it for me. And so I remember vividly the 98 and 99 years. That's really what awakened me to falling in love with soccer.
That's awesome. What age do you think you first started playing soccer?
Oh, I started playing in like under 8. So yeah, under 8, under 9 division. And then I've played ever since.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't really remember much. I remember a little bit about the 94 World Cup here in the States, and then I guess 99 I watched a little bit, but 2002 was the first World Cup where I was kind of all about it. And I remember getting up super early because it was in Korea and Japan.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, I didn't get much sleep that month of June, I don't think.
Yeah. I think this World Cup is the most I've ever watched, though. I think it's just grown. I guess every World Cup, watched more and more. All right, so what about now? Where do you live now, and what's your experience with soccer present day?
Yeah. So I live in Moscow, Russia now. This is my 5th year living there. Before then, I actually lived in Seoul, South Korea, and I lived there for 4 years as well. I teach economics at international schools, and so right now I teach at the Anglo-American school. It's basically the U.S. Embassy school in Moscow, and I'm also the varsity boys soccer coach for this school as well. And we're a school of about 64 nationalities, 63, 64 nationalities, so very diverse. I don't think I had an American on my varsity soccer team this year. But so I teach economics there. My wife teaches kindergarten, and I coach soccer, and I still play soccer there actually as well.
What do you play there?
I play in this six-a-side, this competitive six-a-side league. When I was in South Korea, I played, actually, it was an amateur team, but we were in the Korean football pyramid, and played there. It was an 11-a-side, but now that I'm 32, I think, I don't know, I feel older than maybe I am, but six-a-side suits me more now, and so I enjoy six-a-side, so that's what I play now fairly regularly.
How is the level there in Russia for the kids and even the six-a-side league, do you think?
For the students, it's interesting because there's not a lot of international schools in Moscow, and so consequently we play a lot of Russian clubs. And so, you know, we'll play a club one day, and you can tell that those boys train 3-4 hours a day, and they do more of that than they do going to school. And so it's tough for our boys because we're the opposite. You know, we sit in school all day and then train for an hour or two. And so it's a good learning curve for our players at AAS, but it's good for them in our conference that we're in. It's called CISA. It's the Central European and Eastern European Schools Association. And so at the end of every season, we will fly somewhere and play, schools from Ukraine, Prague, Budapest, Bucharest, Romania. And so we play students and student athletes from all over Eastern and Central Europe. And so playing against these Russian clubs is a good experience for them, even if they aren't so successful in the win-loss column.
Yeah. What is in Russia there, what does soccer rank in terms of the sports hierarchy? Like here, it's probably like fourth or fifth most
Fourth or
popular?
fifth, yeah. Yeah, probably in Russia, I'd say it's after the World Cup, I'd say it's probably number one right now. Ice hockey's obviously huge as well, but I'd say football's probably the biggest sport. It's played constantly by everyone, it seems like, and not everyone has the same access to all of the ice hockey equipment, right? Because ice hockey is really expensive to play, and so while everyone has ice skates, of course, but I'd say probably soccer is probably the number one sport for sure.
Okay. Awesome. What do you think what was the experience like in Russia before the World Cup with soccer and the culture, before the tournament kicked off? What do you think that was like?
Yeah, soccer is a funny sport because even though it's the number one sport, Russians are really stereotypically pessimistic about their soccer. I mean, leading up to the tournament, the Svornaya, the Russian national team, they'd lost, or I think they were winless in like their 8 games prior to the World Cup. And so, Russia had, especially in Moscow, they've spent the last 4 years building up for this World Cup, whether it's infrastructure, English signs, English speaking people. They've been building for this, yet the whole way people were not really positive about their hopes for the Russian national team. And so it created this funny dynamic where everyone was getting excited, but they weren't actually getting excited about their own country. And so it was wonderful this last few weeks watching, after the opener against Saudi Arabia, I think Russians were probably more confused than anything. And then when they had positive result against Egypt, then people were kind of starting to believe. And then, of course, then that 3-0 result against Uruguay sent them all crashing down, and everyone was like, well, yeah, that's what we thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
But then, they pulled that miracle off against Spain, and I was lucky enough to be at that game. But and from then, they were almost playing with house money, and it seemed like this, especially the city of Moscow, really turned into a party atmosphere, and they were proud of their players regardless of what happened after that. That was kind of icing on the cake for them, and it really transformed the city, and I would imagine the country, as far as their positivity towards the national team.
That's awesome. What do you think, if anything, changed pre-World Cup? Because a lot of people were thinking that they wouldn't even make it out of their group. I think I had them picked to finish third, maybe.
Yeah, I didn't see them getting out of their group either. That being said, though, funny things happen to home sides,
Yep.
and they always seem to do a little better than people anticipated. And so I'm certainly not, hinting at match fixing or anything like that, but they had some good luck. Early on that first game against Saudi Arabia, Alan Jagoev, who's like one of the best players for Russia, he went out injured, and in came Denis Cheryshev, who is really not loved by Russian fans. They don't really think he's fully Russian because he lives in Spain. He's always lived in Spain. He speaks Spanish better than Russian. And, he's a really technically talented player. And I mean, now you look back at this tournament and you watch some of those goals he scored, and he might not have seen the field, or he certainly wouldn't have seen the field near as much without Alan Jagoev going down. And so, that's an interesting dynamic where a lot of people in Russia are giving Cherchesov, the coach, a lot of credit. They're like, yeah, he brought in Cheryshev. And it's like, well, yeah, but he was kind of forced into making that change. And so, there's just funny little things about luck there where a player that usually he didn't have the trust of his teammates and his country and his coach, he really came in and stepped up. And I would say he's one of the better midfielders in the entire tournament.
Yeah, I think that's the only name that I really remember that I would take away from the Russian team after the tournament is Cheryshev.
Yeah.
But I guess we've seen the same sort of thing happen in previous World Cups where the host does really well. USA in 94, I think we beat Colombia and then got out of the group to face Brazil.
Yeah, that's right.
And I still just remember I think Tab Ramos getting elbowed in the face
Yeah,
Red card,
yeah,
maybe?
I do remember that. Yeah, and then the
Korea.
next World Cup, obviously France won in France, and their home atmosphere is amazing.
Right.
And then in Korea, yeah, South Korea way overachieved. I mean, they finished fourth. That's unheard of for an Asian side. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's that hometown atmosphere that, even it doesn't even the games even where Russia wasn't even playing, intermittently you'd start hearing the Russia chant in the stadiums, and you could hear it on TV even. And so, I mean, the players have to feel good about that, and it certainly picked them up. I mean, look, this Russian team, a lot of their personalities are not even very likable, and so I think the Russian fans, they weren't really ready to buy in. And then you have guys like Artyom Zuba, that big forward who has been on the outs with like three coaches in the Russian, Premier League in the last few years, and he was sent on loan from Zenit St. Petersburg this year because he couldn't get along with his coach, and then now he's one of the most popular Russian players, and everybody wants him because he had a positive tournament. He seemed like he was fighting for the team, and I think this team, going into it, I said, even living there for almost 5 years now, I wasn't really going to root for them, but as the tournament went on, they kind of became likable, and certainly, by the end, I was certainly more disappointed than I ever thought I would be when they ended up losing to Croatia in penalties.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about your experience there. I see that you went to 6 games in all. You got to see Messi play. You got to see the Viking clap, which is big for me because I was supporting Iceland for this tournament just as the underdog.
Yeah.
Mexico, you got to see Belgium. You saw a dud of a game in the France-Denmark game. And you also got to see the big game, the Spain losing to Russia. So tell us a little bit about those games, anything that stands out, from Argentina, Iceland, all the way to England, Colombia.
Yeah, so I was super unlucky at first because I got 0 tickets in the initial lottery phases of the allocation. And so it's funny because, all of my friends that really aren't even huge soccer fans, they were getting tickets, and I didn't get any. And so it was kind of a low start. And that was like, a month after the U.S. failed to qualify. And so I was like really down in the dumps early on about my prospects for the World Cups. But then, through friends here or there, I ended up getting 6 games of tickets. And, that first weekend was amazing for me because it was a 2-day, just over 24-hour span where I got to see Argentina, Iceland. And then the very next day, I saw Germany, Mexico. And so that was the whirlwind of a weekend for me where, obviously seeing Messi is special, but seeing Iceland's tactics and how they, 10 around Messi, every time he had the ball, he was just smothered. And what a team performance by them. Obviously, they kind of disappointed at the end, but I was really excited to see them. In that stadium, though, it was interesting because about 90% of it was Argentina. And so the Viking clap wasn't near as special as you had seen it at the Euros 2 years ago. But I heard against Croatia, they really packed out that stadium and they had more of the fans there. But
Did it seem like
then
Russia fans were picking certain teams? I almost felt like maybe I saw Russian fans like dressed up as like Iceland fans and doing the clap, or did you see anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think, Russia was certainly going to cheer on their Eastern European counterparts more so. But then, of course, a team like Iceland is pretty likable. And so if a Russian fan is going to get tickets to that game, they're going to be rooting probably for Iceland. However, that being said, because Russia's not that successful of a footballing country, they also really like stars. And so, whether it was the Confederations Cup last year when Portugal was there, anytime Russia got the ball, people were almost disappointed. They wanted to see Ronaldo when Portugal played Russia. They wanted to see Ronaldo on the ball, and they cheered louder for him than anybody. And it kind of felt like that too with Messi, where, anytime Messi got the ball, he's electric, right? And so, even if people were rooting for Iceland, they were cheering when Messi was on the ball. And so, but yeah, you saw Russians definitely supporting other sides too, because for Russians, there's never any guarantee they were going to get to see their own country play. And so if I just randomly get tickets to a Iceland Argentina game, I'm going to pick a team to support if I'm a Russian.
Right. Is this your first World Cup that you had been to?
Yeah, this is my first World Cup I've been to in person. Yeah.
What was the experience like in the stadium, and also, I guess, in the city, because I went to Germany in 2006, but didn't get to go to a game. I was only out and about, like at the Fan Fest and in the web cafes. It was pretty amazing because there was people from all over the world, and you just heard all these languages and all these different people talking and trying to call home. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the atmosphere in Moscow is just unreal the last month. I mean, it, whether it was the Mexican fans or the Colombian fans early on, or the Argentines, the Peruvian fans as well were amazing. I mean, I don't know if you read any of these articles about, people selling their homes in Peru to come, or selling their cars to come and see Peru in the World Cup for the first time in like 30 something years. And they just brought a party atmosphere to the city. It was the most fun I've ever seen Moscow. And I'm sure St. Petersburg and Sochi and those other cities were the same. And you could see, Russia's really good at putting on spectacles, whether it's the 2012 Winter Olympics in Sochi or this, or the World Track and Field Championships a few years ago. They're really good at, moving people, getting people in and out of stadiums, putting on big events. And so, the infrastructure's there. And for a place like Moscow, 15 million people, you can be in places where the World Cup fans were, or you could go to places in the city where it was still pretty quiet and business as usual. Moscow could really handle having 1 million plus fans there for games. Maybe places like Ekaterinburg and those smaller cities, they probably felt like they were taken over by fans, but Moscow really didn't. You could go to where the fun areas were, but you could also go to quiet areas, and I think that was a good balance.
That's awesome. Is there any other special moments from the games that you liked, whether it be Belgium beating up on Tunisia or the England-Colombia game with the Kane goal?
Well, first, that Germany-Mexico game was really special. It was 90% Mexican fans. They were just feeding off that counter-attacking football that they were playing up the wings, especially to Chucky Lozano. And it was excitement anytime Mexico was breaking free, and I'm sure Germans hated it, but it was a great atmosphere. And, the beer showers after the goal and at the final whistle, that was special. And it was a really cool atmosphere to be a part of. As well, though, it's always a treat to watch Belgium play. Tunisia, credit to them, they came out and they went toe-to-toe with Belgium early on. There was 3 goals in the first 20 minutes, I think, if my memory is right. And, it was apparent that Tunisia were going to lose, but that they were going to at least not bunker. And I appreciated that about them. But Lukaku and De Bruyne and Hazard were just too good for that. And that was special to see, especially, seeing their success throughout the tournament.
Yeah, I think Hazard had 2 goals, Lukaku had 2, and then Batshuayi had the last one.
That's right, yeah. And Batshuayi probably in 10 minutes should have had about 5.
Jeez.
That at the end they were pressing. And so, I mean, yeah, you talk about the name brands in that game. It was top notch, and that was a lot of fun. Of course, then the very next game I watched after that was the France-Denmark game, and the only goalless draw in the tournament. Neither team was really that interested because they'd both already booked their spots in the next round. So it was cool to say I saw the champions play, but goodness, I think half their lineup was probably guys that never even played any other game in that tournament. And so it wasn't a showcase of football that day for sure.
That's one question I thought of as a player. Would you still enjoy being on that team if you didn't play at all and still got to win the World Cup?
Yeah, it's interesting. You saw at the end of the final, you saw the players on the bench, and they were all, like shaking with anticipation of that final whistle. You get caught up in the hype. I'm sure they were still a huge part of it, and they felt involved. Of course, they'd like to have played a bigger part, but when you get down to the end of those lineups, you're not going to play that many minutes in this tournament.
Yeah, I'm still kind of shocked that Anthony Martial didn't make it. And then another question I had was whether Croatia would give one of the medals to the Kalinic guy that went home.
Yeah, I read that the players were going to take a vote as to whether they were going to give a medal to him. I didn't do any research on it to see if they ended up deciding, but yeah, that was. I think credit to their coach. He handled that really well. He didn't let it fester, and you have a cancerous. Yeah, you have a cancerous tumor in your side, then get it out. And he did a great job of that. And, you think about, like, France teams in the past and how they've had bad teammates, and it's just festered, and it's really hurt them. And whether you're talking World Cups or Euros where France is severely underachieved, and it's usually because of a bad apple or two. And so it's hindsight's 2020, but I think Croatia handled that really well. Should he get a medal? I would say no, but I don't know what the players ended up deciding there.
Yeah, I was interested to see, and I wondered if he had still been there, if that would have helped them with all the, having another sub to go up top for Mandzukic and just them being so tired. I don't know if that played a part at all in the final.
Well, you think it could have, because playing 3 overtime games in a row or something like that, and depth is depth, and if the coach trusted him in game 1, he probably would have trusted him in game 5 or 6, and so it's a tough call to make as a coach, but I think he probably made the right choice, but no coach anticipates going into overtime 3 games in a row either after that. So, yeah. The miles racked up on them near the end for sure. And you could see that in the second half. They were the better team in the first half of that World Cup final.
Yeah.
But, their legs were just done in that second half.
It was weird. I picked Belgium to win it all over Croatia, so I was pretty close. But
yeah, you were.
I don't know I guess Belgium, they were saying maybe Belgium could beat France maybe like 9 times out of 10. Possibly.
Yeah. Belgium, goodness, on paper, they're certainly the best team in the world. I certainly would have picked them over France any day with that young lineup that France had. But, yeah, sometimes the stars just don't align for those star-studded teams. But, you're right. I think Belgium, they certainly were probably one of the top 1 or 2 most talented teams at the tournament.
Especially seeing USA play France as a warm-up before the tournament. I really didn't think that France would get that far after seeing that display.
Yeah, that was wild, wasn't it? It was, it's practically, it was their World Cup team, and they started with their starting 11, and that young American team really went toe-to-toe with them. I kind of forgot about that until a couple of days ago, and I was like, goodness, Julian Green just scored on that team, right? And that was a really fun game. And I actually went out. That was one of the first times that I've ever seen a U.S. men's national team game on national TV in Russia. And I went out to a pub to watch that USA-France game. And every fan in that pub was cheering for France, except for me. But it was a lot of fun, and I really had fun watching that side. And who knows how many of those guys will keep playing with, this whoever gets hired for the U.S. But talking about pointing in the right direction. But after that game, I certainly didn't think France was going to win the whole tournament.
That reminds me, I meant to finish reading the article I saw. I think it was on The Athletic. There was a reporter that watched the World Cup with Michael Bradley and wrote an article about it and how that felt for him to be at home watching.
I saw a tweet about that. I haven't yet subscribed to The Athletic. I need to get on that train. But I saw an article that would have been fascinating to read. And I would certainly want to know his thoughts on that.
Yeah, I need to finish reading that. And then another thing is wondering if the U.S., if we can learn from this failure. And I was thinking about a quote I heard, I think about France and Deschamps, and how them losing the last tournament and how they wouldn't be here if they hadn't lost the Euro, I think, in France.
Yeah.
And how they learned from that. And I think he said he picked strong men for his team, whatever that means.
Yeah, well, goodness, going back to the U.S., I would surely hope that they've learned something from this. I'm not sure what that lesson is yet, apart from, I guess, that every game matters. But, it's interesting. I think the U.S. is going to struggle because half of the people in charge right now are part of the old guard, and half of them are new and want to change things. And I'd like to think that guys like Ernie Stewart are going to come in and change this culture. But, you still have people saying that it's Jurgen's fault that they didn't qualify. And I'm not a Jurgen apologist. I try to be pretty balanced. I like him, but I try to be balanced. It's hard to defend at the end. But, he was only in charge of 2 games out of the, 10 of the Hex or 8 or whatever it was. And at some point, the blame's got to go to other places as well as Jurgen. He's certainly a part of it, but it's got to go elsewhere too. And if we keep just saying it was Jurgen's fault we didn't qualify, then we're obviously ignoring other issues too. And whether it's pay to play or or, that old guard or a lack of team chemistry. I mean, there was a ton of issues, I think. The longer I think about it, the more issues there probably were.
Yeah, I think the
Just not
German
strong.
part of it was rough too, about bringing in
Yeah.
the German players and them not meshing. After,
Yeah.
I don't know if you listened to the American Fiasco podcast.
No, yeah, that was great, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really good about '98, and even I
Yeah.
think the coach bringing in David Regie from France at the last
Yeah.
minute and no one knowing who he was.
Yeah, I remember when they were saying, like, yeah, his other teammates didn't even really know who he was when he came in. He was so unknown, and he struggled to even speak English with them. And yeah, that's tough for team chemistry. And you can see how that'd be a struggle with all of the, I hate the term German Americans, but um the Americans, let's call them the Americans that are living in Germany full time. I think certainly they bring a certain quality. Jermaine Jones, I'm a huge Jermaine Jones fan. I feel like if you need to win a game right now to save your life, I want Jermaine Jones on that field. I don't care if he hasn't played in 6 months. I want him on that field because of the passion and heart he brings. But tactically, he just wasn't fitting in with Michael Bradley, and you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to go with maybe the more supremely talented player or your captain. And right or wrong, they went with the captain, and Jermaine Jones certainly didn't help build chemistry there. And you talk about Timothy Chandler, who I think he just said in the news that he's wanting to come back into the U.S. fold. And goodness, I think with the right coach, I don't see why not. He never was the most dedicated. It's easy for people to say that, though. I've never heard any quotes from him about whether he was dedicated or not. But I mean, he's one of the best right backs in the Bundesliga right now, and so I certainly would like to see him get another chance. But those guys certainly didn't ingratiate themselves to the usuals, and so it's always going to be tough. And that's where you get into that discussion of are you fielding your best players or are you fielding the best team? And I think maybe Jurgen got that wrong sometimes, where he fielded the best players and not the best team. And you certainly saw that throughout different campaigns that he went through. And then you see, I mean, that second-rate Gold Cup that we won last year, where I mean, let's face it, it was a B or maybe C team tournament, but I mean, the guys that the U.S. was citing were pretty much all MLS players, and then they still hung with it. And so you got to find that balance between the best players and the best team, and hopefully they can bring in a guy that can do that looking forward.
Yeah, I think that will be the next step, and we will all take from that. I guess what we think and where we think this will go based on who they pick as the coach. That will kind of determine our response and kind of where it's headed and where they see it headed based on who they choose as the coach.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and there's a lot of names that have been thrown out there, but I mean, it's all conjecture at this point. Who knows?
I think it's just good if we can get more players over to Europe. We already see that happening, and even coaches as well. And just if we focus on the youth, I think that will help us a ton. That's helped other teams. We see how the youth teams have done well in tournaments, and then that team, those guys growing up together and coming to the next level and already knowing and playing with one another, that helps.
Yeah, like these early friendlies here with Josh Sargent and Pulisic and Weston McKennie and those guys. I mean, you're talking all those guys a generation ago in the U.S. They were all playing at Virginia for Bruce Arena or Steve Sampson or Ziggy Schmidt at UCLA or whatever, right? And now they're all starting against France. And I mean, times are changing in the U.S. and they have changed, and it's only going to make the U.S. better down the road for sure.
Yeah. Back to Russia real quick. How do you think the tournament is going to change the country, the sport there? How has it already changed? How will it and can it change just Russia, I guess, football?
Yeah, Russian football has a lot of problems right now. I think, I actually read a story today about kind of the number 5 most popular team in Moscow. It's a Torpedo Moscow, and they've struggled with some far right racist issues, but they just signed a player that's racially half black, half white, and their team colors are black and white. And I think one of their supporters groups came out and said something like, even though black is in our team colors, we don't want that in our team. And it was shocking. And it's a fringe group, and they're really racist. And But the fact that that stuff is, I mean, they're still comfortable saying those things, and it's awful. And so, Russia still has its demons. But I think this World Cup is going to help grow the league. One, I think it's going to make, guys that maybe aren't being successful in Western Europe, they're going to look at Russia and they're going to say, you know what, I could go live in Sochi and play football and enjoy life, or I could go live in St. Petersburg and enjoy life. And I think that's pretty important. And so, I think you could start to see some European and maybe South American players that trust coming to Russia more, like even a player like Mario Fernandez, the right back for Russia. He's Brazilian, but he's played for CSKA, for CSKA for the last, goodness, 5 or 6 years now, and he got Russian citizenship, and he was one of the better players, I think, for Russia in the tournament. And so I think guys will start to look to Russia to play. But on the flip side, and this is, I think, good for the national team there, is I think Russian players are going to be looked at more by European clubs. It's rare for a Russian player to leave Russia and to go be successful in Europe. And so, you had that flash in the pan with Arshavin at Arsenal, but that didn't last real long, a couple seasons maybe. I think Golovin right now is about to sign with Chelsea, even with their money problems. And you started to hear some other names thrown around too. Cheryshev will probably get some more opportunities in Spain. And so I think it's going to go both ways. You're going to see a migration of players coming into Russia, but you'll also see some Russian players going overseas, which I think will be great for their national team.
That's interesting too, because as those players leave Russia and the league there, that opens up spots for more young Russians, I think, to come up and play as well.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. And I think, before the tournament, the guy I was most disappointed in not making the Russian side is this 18-year-old. His name's Fyodor Shalov, and he plays for CSKA Moscow. And he's played there the last 2 years as a 17, 18-year-old and has scored about 10 games each season. And I was really hoping he made the preliminary squad, and then was one of the last guys cut. And he doesn't ever start for CSKA. He comes off the bench. And so you see a guy like Golovin leave, or a guy like Jagoev get an opportunity to go into Europe, and Shalov is getting more playing time. And it creates opportunities, and it also incentives and idols. Like these young guys can be like, I want to be like X player, getting that move into Europe. And so I mean, I think that it's a huge net positive for Russia, even if their players leave the Russian Premier League. I think that's better, certainly for the Russian side, but it could even be for the Russian Premier League, because it'll bring in these kids and some other foreign players that'll bring some class to the league.
So I guess most of the players for the Russian team this summer, they play in Russia in the league there?
Yeah, I think all of them, but maybe one or two.
Okay. And then if that doesn't work out, they always have that Burger King promotion that they can fall back on. They had the women telling them to hook up with the World Cup stars to have children. They would become Russian soccer stars.
That was cringeworthy, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was funny. I saw a picture where they were showing, I guess, Mbappe next to Dida, who was the Brazilian goalkeeper in France during '98. And how close, how much they resembled each other.
How they look like each other. Yeah. Makes you wonder.
Yeah. Is there anything that the United States looking forward to 2026? Anything that we can learn from how Russia hosted the tournament? Because I didn't hear anything really negative about the experience there. There was no bad stories about the host country. And
no, I mean, again, I think Russia's really good at putting on performances, and they did a great job. I think, I was telling people before, and people worried about crowd trouble, especially about the English fans and things like that. And I throw up some pictures on Twitter from when I was at the Confederations Cup, where, I mean, you leave that stadium and it's 10,000 policemen on horseback and with batons and riot gear. I mean, there's no way you can have any crowd trouble in Russia. You'd risk your life if you decided to cause any crowd trouble in Russia. And so, I mean, there was never going to be any of that, regardless of how the U.S. or especially the British tabloids blew that up. Geez. And so they ran things really well. And I think it was a good opportunity for Russia to see a huge influx of tourism, and not just tourism from like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, but tourism from people that normally don't come to Russia. And they were exposed to, tens of thousands of Latin Americans, hundreds of thousands of Latin Americans the Spanish, Portuguese, all these people that, let's face it, they never go to holiday in Russia. And so it was good for Russia to become more open-minded towards multicultural tourism. Obviously, the U.S. is a little bit different in that regard because of the melting pot idea, or a salad bowl, whatever you want to call it, for the U.S. But the U.S. is good at hosting events in the sense that, let's face it, the U.S. could host a World Cup tomorrow. They have the infrastructure. They have the stadiums. The cities have the infrastructure. The cities have the hotels. They could do it tomorrow. And so I think, building for 2026, I think the important part is to build the sporting aspect of it. The infrastructure part's there. And of course the U.S. has its own social issues right now, whether you're talking about immigration or things like that. And, people were asking me in Russia, they were like, so in 2026, are the immigration officials going to be walking around stadiums looking for papers? And I'm like, come on, I think that's a bit rash and a bit difficult to talk about right now, because that 2026 is so far away. But that's in people's minds. I mean, I had Europeans asking me about, can 50,000 Colombian people walk around safely in the United States right now? And I think they could, but the U.S. has these issues right now that they are dealing with as well, and I think that's something that certainly needs to get ironed out prior to 2026. But again, thankfully, that's a long way away.
Yeah, that's true. I think hopefully there'll be. Now, I mean, by then there will be a different president, I think.
Sure.
And
sure.
Like you were talking about with the policing, I was kind of shocked that I think it was the final where 3 people ran on the field.
Yeah.
I was thinking I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to face those consequences for ruining the game in Russia.
No. And if I don't know if you probably didn't watch it, but somebody videoed the interrogation of these individuals who were connected with the protest pop group. They're called Pussy Riot, and they get arrested all the time in Russia. Yeah, so they were connected with that, and so it was a big political statement. But yeah, when they were getting interrogated, they were talking about how they brought shame to Russia, and they, it wouldn't have been a fun interrogation to be a part of. But I think they knew what they were getting into, because they weren't just anybody. They were doing it on purpose to stage a pretty significant protest, I think.
Yeah. So I guess you thoroughly enjoyed the World Cup and your experience there at the 6 games and watching.
Oh yeah,
all of it.
Oh, it was unreal. I mean, I've never seen one in person like this. And I go to Champions League games a lot and Europa League games in Russia, and that's club football and national team football are so different. It's really an intimidating atmosphere in Champions League. There's the militant fans. It just has the tense feeling that it just wasn't there in the World Cup. It was just a party. And I go back to Moscow on August 10th, and I'm not sad, but I am going to be a little bit sad to go back, and it's going to feel like, the World Cup hangover. We'll see how Russia, if they revert to the mean a little bit, or if they can continue progressing, and I hope they continue progressing.
Yeah, I really do think that, like they said, that this was one of the best World Cups. You think all the players, all the coaches, and just all the atmosphere and the culture, everything was positive. And the only negatives that I take away from the World Cup would be certain things like diving, or maybe Neymar, all the rolling.
Yeah.
And, the other guy, Kalinic, not, agreeing to come on as a substitute. Stuff like that was, I think, negative. And some of the players, I was very sad about the Griezmann, how he drew that free kick at the beginning of the final.
Yeah.
And then also the handball. I feel like those 2 things could have changed the game, and it could have been it could have been tied. Yeah,
absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I think that first half was so unlucky, really, for Croatia, because they were the better side, certainly, and certainly the more dangerous side. But, all in all, the second half ended up becoming more about football, and it was entertaining. And I think, thankfully, the second half was maybe made people forget a little bit about the first half, because it would have been a shame if the entire tournament had ended on, that first half. Yep. That would have been really disappointing, because you're right. I mean, there are so few negatives that I can think of when it came to this tournament. You're right. The Croatian player refusing, obviously the rolling of Neymar and some other players Mbappe was certainly one that had some theatrics at time as well and some time wasting issues. But outside of that, I think the football really held the tournament, and I think the soccer was the showcase. It really felt like it. There wasn't very many controversies, like French guys, refusing to train or anything like that. And so in that regard, this tournament was a wonderful endorsement of soccer. Now, of course, there's going to be, especially Americans, who are going to be like, yeah, Neymar dives too much. Yeah, he does. He does. I mean, people that follow it agree, but that's not the lasting image of the World Cup, certainly.
Did you see the video of the kids at their soccer practice and the coach yelled Neymar?
Yes, I did. I was joking that I was going to do that with my team this fall, but any of them that actually took the bait, I would go step on their ankles in order to make sure they didn't do it again. But
yeah, actually, during the final, I have a good friend of mine that lives in D.C. area, and he's more of a basketball, football fan, I think. But he texted me after that free kick, where Griezmann drew the free kick, and it ended up being a goal. I think it was a Mandzukic own goal.
Yeah, the own goal, yeah.
And he texted me right away after that and said, that's why Americans don't watch soccer. A player's flop leads to that goal.
Yeah.
And so that was unfortunate for me. I'm trying to get more people to love the game that I love.
Yeah, the same. I had a very similar conversation with somebody here. Actually, just today, they delivered some furniture here to me, and they're like, "Did you watch the final?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Yeah, they're like, yeah, it's tough because that guy's flopping all over, and then they get a goal off it." And I was like, "Yeah, that's." I hate having to try and explain that away, but yeah, that was too bad.
And then we have the next World Cup, which is going to be totally different. I don't know how it's going to work because it's going to be, I think, November 17th to December 18th, something like that.
Yeah, it's going to be a weird time frame, I think. And, the European leagues aren't happy about it because they're going to have to shut down. And there's going to be a lot of logistics to iron out for that, both in the country, for infrastructure-wise stadium, but also, the logistics of all of these leagues having to figure out, are they shutting down for the whole month? Because if you think about it, even, the English Premier League or the Bundesliga, they're still only going to have like a single-digit percentage of their players going to the tournament. So do you really shut down? I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of decisions that are going to have to be made over the next few years to plan for that, because it's going to be really disruptful for world football.
Yeah, and then they have that, I don't know, they could do like a winter break like they do in Germany after the tournament, but then, England, they have their Boxing Day matches, which is a tradition, so
yeah,
it's going to be interesting to say the least.
Yeah, it'll certainly be unique. It'll be unique for world football, that's for sure.
And then the last question I want to talk about was about Atlanta United. You're an Atlanta United supporter?
Yeah, big time.
You were able to watch that in Russia?
Yeah. My wife hates it, but I usually am getting up in the middle of the night. She'll be like, "Oh, what time are you getting up on this Saturday night or this Sunday night or Monday morning, I guess?" And they're usually games around like 3 p.m. or sorry, a.m., 2 or 3 a.m. And so I'll get up and watch those games in the middle of the night on some sketchy stream that I found somewhere. Because I tried to get, that streaming package and use my VPN to make it seem like I was in the U.S., but they must have some good detectives, because they sniff out my VPN every time and kick me out. So that subscription didn't work out for me. So I'm left having to use some sketchy streams I can find on sketchy sites. But yeah, man, I watch a lot of the Atlanta United team. Just went to my first game at Mercedes-Benz. I hadn't been there yet. What an arena. It's unreal. Unfortunately, the game this last weekend was terrible against Seattle. Seattle did their best to waste time from about the 15th minute on. That you could tell all they wanted was a draw. So,
but at least you had a goal. Yeah, that was a pretty amazing goal. I don't know how tall Martinez is versus the other defender, but I was amazed he was able to out-jump and win that header.
He's crazy. He's scored as many headers in the last 2 years as I think almost any other forward in MLS, and he's 5'7". And I think that's a crazy game plan for Atlanta. I mean, near the end of the game, all they were doing was just dumping balls in the box, and they subbed on Romario Williams, who, I mean, you're probably familiar with for sure. But that's fine. But I mean, I don't know. I was a bit disappointed with their creativity near the end of that game, because I think they could have done a little better. Have brought in maybe an Andrew Carlton on the wing to dribble into the box rather than just dumping crosses in the box. I think Atlanta had like 30 crosses in that game. And I mean, when your main striker's 5'7", that just doesn't make sense to me. And so, I mean, I'm 5'8", and when I play, I certainly don't want a team dumping 30 crosses into the box towards my head. So, I mean, that doesn't make sense. So, he's an electric player, and he can jump crazy high. I mean, he goes and gets some balls out of the air that I don't think any 5'7" guy should reach. But that's not a lasting game plan either when a team wants to bunker.
Yeah, I got to see him here when Atlanta played in the Carolina Challenge Cup the last 2 years, and I got to see him warming up and kicking around. He has huge strength in his legs. I was amazed when he was kicking the ball with like no effort, and it was a rocket.
Yeah, he's a solid dude, isn't he? And I think his biggest attribute maybe isn't even his jumping ability, but just his movement in the box. I mean, he's really good at moving between the defenders and finding that space, and I think that's really where he gets his headers from, more probably than even his jumping ability. But yeah, dude can sky. He can jump.
Yeah, I got a Almiron jersey myself because I was so impressed with, I guess, his playmaking ability, and I'm kind of wondering how long these players are going to be able to stay in MLS.
Yeah, I can't see Almiron staying too much longer. Every window you hear, well, this might be the one. And of course, Atlanta want to keep him as low as possible, but they're also realistic that they need to, sell him, because they said they would. They promised him that they would help him, but two, they got to cash in as well, because they have a lot of money that they've not sunk in a bad way, but that they've spent on Almiron and now Barco and Martinez and they've got to recoup some of that at some point in the near future.
Speaking of Atlanta, do you have any idea, or can you kind of explain to other listeners how they were able to do so well starting a team, and just how they're able to draw so many people to these games? Because they're having record turnout, like 72,000 fans at these games, the past couple games and so on.
Yeah, Atlanta gets a bad rap as a bad sports city. I mean, you talk about how there's never really many people at the Hawks games. Now, the Falcons usually always sell out. Braves are really the biggest poster child for terrible attendance. But that being said, though, Atlanta is also a huge youth soccer hotspot. And I mean, it's a metro area of 6 million people. I think people not from Atlanta don't realize how big the metro area is. And I mean, 6 million people. And it's incredibly multicultural. There's large Hispanic populations, there's large Asian populations, and you come to an Atlanta United game, and it is the congregation of all of these different minority communities, and you don't see that at like a baseball game or in a different way, maybe a Hawks game or a Falcons game, where they're not so multicultural. And this is the first team, I think, that really caters to the multiculturalism that is at Atlanta. And I think that's really where it came from. Obviously, winning right away helps, right? If Atlanta had been like Minnesota United last year, then that wouldn't have helped things. But I mean, I've been on the waiting list now for season tickets. I didn't jump on them the first year, but for 2 years now, and I mean, the waiting list is in the thousands for season tickets, and they've already sold over 35,000. So, I mean, what they've done is incredible.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it. We have trouble here with Charleston being able to draw a lot of people, and it's more, I think, of a family atmosphere, kind of like a baseball game, because you don't have people standing up, yelling as much. We only have one small section of supporters in E1, and then when you sit in the west to the home side, it's more, like people on dates or people at a baseball game eating and kind of talking to each other and
Sure.
kind of watching here and there. So that's kind of what we're working on here. And I don't know how Atlanta does it. I don't know if it's really, I guess it's maybe both. It's a family atmosphere, and they also have the supporters areas.
Yeah, in this game that I was at on Sunday, I sat up on the third deck. One, because I wanted to be close to the Halo boards for the World Cup final, but it's pretty tame up there. I mean, people aren't standing up the whole game there. It was different in Bobby Dodd last year, man. I was in the upper deck there last year, and everybody was standing, and I was like, God, I just want to sit down for like 5 minutes. But Mercedes-Benz is obviously much bigger than Bobby Dodd, and so I'm sure a lot of the lower bowl probably stands up most of the game. But
there's something about Bobby Dodd that you would like to kind of still have games there.
Oh, it's amazing, dude. Bobby Dodd was a great atmosphere, and you're right on top of the field. And 45, it almost felt louder than the 72,000 the other day with the roof closed, it had this special feel, and it's outdoors and it's on real grass, and it just had some moments of purity in it that, maybe are taken over a bit by commercialism at Mercedes-Benz. But I mean, take nothing from Mercedes-Benz. They've done everything they can to make it a great facility for Atlanta United too.
Awesome. Yeah, I still haven't even made it to a game. I've been watching a ton of games online and on TV and following the team. I really wanted to make it to the All-Star game. I don't think I'm going to make it to that. Are you going to that?
I am going to that. Yeah, I was really bummed today when I saw Ronaldo is definitely not coming, though I kind of assumed that he wasn't going to come. But there was always that little bit of hope.
Yeah. I read that. I thought that's what they were trying to aim as his first game.
Yeah, I thought that too, or I had read that too. And then today I saw some confirmation that they're going to give him a little bit longer of a holiday. And so he's not even going to start training, I think, with them until like July 30th or something. So
I guess that's smart for them. It kind of sucks for us, but it's smart for them as a team to take care of him.
Yeah. It's interesting, though. Have you seen any of that Netflix? Is it Netflix? Yeah, that Netflix series about Juventus.
I've seen a little bit of it. I need to keep watching it.
Yeah, they're pretty good. And I, was thinking about how this MLS All-Star game was a good opportunity for them to get a pretty cool episode for that in. And how much Ronaldo would be like icing on the cake for that for them. But, obviously they have to think about the sporting aspect of it too, not just the commercial. I mean, they're going to make everything they pay him and more back just off of freaking jersey sales probably. But,
yeah,
they got to take care of him and obviously probably cater to him and his desires and wishes early on too.
I did read that Manchester United, they give their players 3 weeks minimum after a major tournament.
Yeah, that's smart. And, some clubs probably are less than that. But for a guy like him, especially now that he's, 33, you probably need to give him whatever he says he needs. I mean, he's a Ferrari when it comes to, putting all the parts together and knowing what it needs. And so Ferrari's great, but a Ferrari also needs a lot of maintenance, right? And so I think he knows his body probably perfectly. And so I'm sure he has his own, dietitians, his own medical staff, and I'm sure they're saying he probably needs this many days off. And so, I mean, Juventus is probably like, yeah, absolutely.
That's got to be a big fear with a lot of these players, I think, with them being burned out, because I think soccer is different than most other sports in America, where it's like they go all year almost. They have maybe a short break in July or here or there if there isn't a tournament.
Yeah. I mean, you think about a guy like Luka Modric. My goodness. I mean, playing all of the games he plays in La Liga, all of the games he plays in Copa del Rey, all of the games he plays in Champions League, right? Like, he had to have played more than any other person in the entire world this year. And then to go as deep as he did, and then all the overtime games, the miles on his legs have got to be astronomical.
Yeah, I saw that Rakitic played like 70-something games. That was the most of any player.
Jeez, that's amazing. Yeah, I didn't even think of him. And, those two together, the miles that they've put on their legs is astounding.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today and telling us about your experience in Russia and with the World Cup and also with Atlanta and everything. Hopefully we can talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks for having me on. And, if you ever want to talk Champions League or anything like that in the fall, this year Moscow has 3 teams in the Champions League with Loco, Spartak, and CSKA. So I'll be busy in the fall going to a lot of those games too. So anytime.
That's awesome. I used to live in Marseille, so I got to go, bought a season ticket there one year and went to the Champions League game. So that was pretty amazing. And as you said, it's kind of scary at times as well with the flares and some of the supporter sections they had there. So.
Yeah, it's a fun atmosphere.
Awesome. Well, hope you enjoy your time in Atlanta and seeing Atlanta United play. But we'll be in touch and we'll follow you on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle? Andrew B. Wiese, Wiese. Awesome. All right. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right.
You're listening to The Leagues, a World Soccer podcast with Del Shaffer.